Rookie prison guard exposes hidden inmate network, one night that changed everything. Before this night gets buried in paperwork and silence, hit subscribe, like, and comment, because this is how one moment can change everything inside a prison. The alarm didn't sound when it started. That was the first thing Officer Ethan Cole would remember later. No shouts. No emergency lights. Just a strange stillness in cell block C at 2:14 a.m. Ethan had been on the job for exactly 6 weeks. Fresh uniform, spotless boots, still careful not to walk too confidently through the tiers. Veterans like to remind rookies that prisons could sense fear and punish it. That night, Ethan was working graveyard shift, walking the same route he'd already memorized. Conscious. Door seals. Faces behind bars. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Inmates who usually argued were silent. Men who paced all night sat on their bunks, hands folded. A few made eye contact with Ethan, not hostile, not afraid, just aware. Like they were waiting. Ethan paused outside cell C-17. The inmate inside, Marcus Hill, was known for causing problems. Requests, complaints, constant movement. Tonight, Hill sat perfectly still, staring at the wall. "You good?" Ethan asked. Hill didn't answer. That wasn't unusual. What bothered Ethan was Hill's left hand. It rested awkwardly near the mattress seam, fingers barely moving, like he was guarding something invisible. Ethan moved on, heart thudding harder than it should have. At the end of the tier, he noticed another detail. 2 inmates on opposite sides of the block, men with no known connection, tapped their fingers in the same rhythm. 3 slow taps. 2 taps. Ethan almost laughed at himself. New job nerves. Overthinking. But when he passed the control desk, he noticed the logbook. A missing entry. Account check had been signed off, without a signature. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He radioed his supervisor, Sergeant Mills, who brushed it off. Probably a clerical miss. "Finish your round." Ethan did, but his eyes stayed sharp. In the shower area, he spotted damp footprints leading somewhere they shouldn't. In the common space, a trash bag had been tied with an odd knot, neat, deliberate, not rushed. This wasn't chaos. It was coordination. At 2:47 a.m., Ethan returned to cell C-17. Hill was still facing the wall. "Stand for count," Ethan ordered. Hill stood, slowly, and something fell from the mattress seam. Not a weapon. Not drugs. A folded scrap of paper. Ethan's training told him not to touch it. His instincts told him to secure it immediately. He called it in, sealed the area, and waited. By the time Sergeant Mills arrived, the paper was already being treated like evidence. What it contained wasn't a confession or a threat. It was a schedule. Cell numbers. Short phrases that meant nothing on their own, but together formed a pattern. Meal movements. Phone access windows. Maintenance shifts. Someone had mapped the prison's rhythm. Mills' expression changed the moment he read it. "Where did you get this?" "It fell out of his bed," Ethan said. Hill finally spoke. "Wasn't mine." That was when the first lockdown was ordered. As officers searched the block, they found more pieces. Identical notes hidden in vents. Scratched symbols near door frames. A contraband phone taped behind a loose panel, powered on, no fingerprints. The deeper they searched, the quieter the prison became. No resistance. No panic. Just compliance. By dawn, internal investigators were on site. Ethan sat in a small office, replaying the night in his head, wondering if he'd imagined the signs. A lieutenant entered with a tablet and asked him to walk through everything again. When Ethan finished, the lieutenant leaned back slowly. "You didn't catch contraband," he said. "You stumbled into a communication network." Ethan's mouth went dry. "How big?" The lieutenant didn't answer right away. He slid the tablet across the desk. On the screen was a diagram, lines connecting inmates across multiple units, timestamps matching the notes. "This didn't start tonight," the lieutenant said. "You just noticed it." Ethan realized then what made the silence so unsettling. The inmates hadn't been hiding. They'd been operating in plain sight. And when the investigators opened a secured maintenance room later that morning, a room rookies were never supposed to know about what they found inside confirmed it. This wasn't a small operation. It was a system. And Ethan Cole had just stepped into the middle of it. By the time daylight hit the razor wire outside the facility, Ethan Cole was no longer just a rookie guard. He was a problem. Internal Affairs arrived before breakfast count. 2 men in plain clothes, badges clipped but never flashed, moved through the prison with quiet authority. They didn't rush. They didn't ask questions loudly. They already knew what they were looking for. Ethan was pulled off duty and escorted to an interview room near administration. The walls were bare. The lights too bright. A digital recorder sat on the table between him and the investigator, a woman named Deputy Inspector Laura Finch. "You understand why you're here?" Finch asked. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure he did. Finch slid several photographs across the table. The folded schedule. The contraband phone. The identical symbols etched into metal near door frames in 3 different units. "These weren't improvised," she said. "They were standardized." Ethan leaned forward. "So, it wasn't just one block?" Finch's expression didn't change. It was never just one block. As the investigation widened, the prison shifted into a controlled lockdown. Not the loud kind inmates feared, the quiet kind administrators preferred. Movements were restricted. Jobs reassigned. Access reduced without explanation. From the outside, everything looked stable. Inside, pressure was building. Investigators uncovered a layered communication system operating entirely within the prison's routine. Messages were passed through work details, meal timing, even medical appointments. No single inmate carried the full picture. Each one held a fragment, meaningless on its own. Until Ethan noticed the pattern. Reviewing security footage with Finch, he saw it clearly. Inmates crossing paths at precise moments. Brief glances. Micro-movements. A hand adjusting a sleeve. A foot tapping twice before stopping. It wasn't code. It was choreography. Finch paused the footage. "You see why this lasted so long?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It doesn't look suspicious if you don't know what you're looking for." "And you only noticed because you were new," she replied. "You hadn't learned to ignore it yet." That truth landed hard. By the second day, rumors began circulating among staff. Some officers avoided Ethan. Others watched him too closely. A senior guard pulled him aside near the locker room. "Careful," the man whispered. "You don't know who benefits from things staying quiet." That night, Ethan received his first indirect warning. Returning to his car after shift, he noticed the windshield wiper lifted. A small, deliberate signal. No damage. No note. Just a reminder that someone had been close enough to touch his vehicle. Inside the prison, the network responded. Inmates previously flagged as central communicators suddenly became uncooperative. They refused interviews, requested attorneys, claimed ignorance. Others, less important, were quietly reassigned to different units, disrupting investigators' timelines. Evidence started thinning. Then came the disappearance. One of the inmates connected to the maintenance room access logs failed to report for count. His cell was empty. Bedmate. Locker cleared. Official paperwork showed a transfer request approved overnight. The signature authorizing it belonged to a supervisor who was off duty. Finch stared at the form in silence. "They're moving faster now." Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle in his chest. If he hadn't reported the scrap of paper, none of this would have surfaced. But now that it had, the system was fighting back. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing archived maintenance footage, Ethan noticed a familiar knot, the same one he'd seen on the trash bag the first night. It appeared again and again, tied by different inmates in different areas. A signature. Finch cross-referenced it with commissary purchase records. One item stood out, a specific brand of string, only available through a single supply channel inside the prison. They followed it. The trail led not to an inmate, but to a civilian contractor responsible for sanitation supplies. Clean record. Trusted vendor. Unmonitored access to multiple areas. The contractor had unknowingly become the final link. When confronted, he broke quickly. He hadn't known the full scope, only that certain inmates paid well for small favors, passing items, adjusting deliveries, ignoring odd requests. That confession blew the investigation wide open. Search warrants were issued. Units were swept again. This time, resistance appeared, not violent, but procedural. Files delayed. Footage mislabeled. Requests bounced between departments. Finch closed the door to her office and looked at Ethan. "You understand what you stepped into now?" she asked. Ethan did. This wasn't about contraband. It was about control. And as night fell on the second day of the investigation, an anonymous message appeared on Finch's secure terminal. 3 words. "You disrupted balance." Finch didn't look surprised. She looked concerned. Because that balance, she knew, had kept the prison quiet for years. And breaking it meant something or someone would push back. The retaliation didn't come the way Ethan expected. There were no threats shouted from cells. No sudden violence on the tiers. No alarms. What came instead was silence, the kind that feels deliberate, like a room going quiet when someone important walks in. By the 3rd night of the investigation, the prison was running smoother than it had in months. Counts were perfect. Movements were efficient. Disciplinary incidents dropped to 0. To administration, it looked like progress. To Deputy Inspector Laura Finch, it looked like leverage. "They're proving a point," she said quietly, standing beside Ethan in the control room. "This is what order looks like when they're left alone." Ethan watched the monitors. Inmates moved exactly when expected, stopping and starting in near-perfect unison. Guards relaxed without realizing it. The system felt easier to manage, calmer, more predictable. That predictability was the message. Late that night, Finch received confirmation that rattled even her. The sanitation contractor had recanted part of his statement. Claimed confusion. Claimed pressure. His attorney cited procedural errors. Evidence tied to him was suddenly deemed inconclusive. The case was being softened. Ethan felt the knot in his chest tighten. "So what happens now?" Finch didn't answer right away. She pulled up a file Ethan hadn't seen before, an internal review from years earlier. Different facility. Different staff. Same pattern. A rookie officer had reported unusual coordination. An investigation had followed. Then quietly it was shut down. The officer transferred out within 6 months. "He never did anything wrong," Finch said. "He just didn't fit anymore." The implication was clear. Ethan went home just before dawn. As he unlocked his apartment door, he noticed something on the floor inside, his duty gloves, folded neatly on the table. He was certain he hadn't left them there. Nothing else was disturbed. No forced entry. Just a reminder. He didn't sleep. The next morning, Finch called him into her office. She looked exhausted but resolved. "They're offering a compromise," she said. "Unofficially." Ethan swallowed. "What kind?" "Transfers. Reassignments. Quiet discipline for a few inmates. Enough to show action. Not enough to dismantle the structure." "And the network?" Finch met his eyes. "It stays intact." The truth settled between them. The prison wasn't just containing the gangs. It was coexisting with them. The gangs enforced internal discipline, reduced random violence, and kept daily operations manageable. In return, certain lines weren't crossed too aggressively. Ethan realized then why veterans had warned him about noticing too much. That afternoon, Finch made her decision. She submitted a full report, not just internally, but to an external oversight body that couldn't quietly bury it. The report detailed the communication system, the contractor link, the behavioral coordination, and the institutional resistance. Once it was sent, there was no pulling it back. The response was immediate. Finch was reassigned pending review. The investigation was concluded. And Ethan Cole was offered a transfer. A promotion, technically. Better pay. Less exposure. A fresh start at a different facility. The offer came with no pressure, which made it heavier. On his final night at the prison, Ethan walked cell block C1 last time. The inmates watched him pass, expressions neutral. Marcus Hill sat on his bunk, hands folded exactly as he had on the first night. As Ethan reached the end of the tier, Hill spoke softly. "You did what you were supposed to," he said. Ethan stopped. "By whose rules?" Hill didn't answer. At the gate, Sergeant Mills shook Ethan's hand. "You'll do fine out there," he said. "Just remember, some systems don't want fixing." Weeks later, at his new post, Ethan received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page, a training memo distributed quietly across several facilities. New guidelines. Updated observation protocols. Emphasis on early anomaly detection. The changes were real. So were the limits. Ethan folded the paper, understanding the final truth. He hadn't dismantled the system. He had exposed it just enough to force adjustment. The prison gangs didn't disappear. They adapted. And somewhere, inside a facility he'd never work in again, the balance was restored, not because justice demanded it, but because order required it. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.